Guys, as promised, I'm rebuilding my PC and I'm going to be building it in the Fractal North XL. If you want to check out the actual review we did, we published it earlier, so there'll be a link in the description below. For this build, I'm doing a bit of a side grade with some upgrades and some general changes. So I'll be moving away from Fractal Torrent to the Fractal North XL, and I'll be doing some changes in terms of the cooling, the power supply, and also the graphics card. So let's get into it. First, what I've done is I've just taken out some of the parts from my existing system. Here I've got the motherboard with CPU, the cooler, and everything on it. What I've decided to do for this build, to both test out the actual system and how you're building it, and to just change to liquid cooling. I'm gonna take off this air cooler. I'm gonna actually change the existing plate with one of these contact plates, hopefully without breaking the CPU, and then install air cooler once I get into the build of itself. So let's get this one off first. So this could be both a bit of a build and also a bit of a maintenance on the system. A long overdue maintenance actually. Thermal paste after a few years is still doing well. Right, before I start messing around with the contact plate or the motherboard itself, I'll just take off all the bits from here. For the contact plate, we're going to go for a budget version. I'm going to use the firmware version, and I've never installed it, so this will be fun. I think I'm going to take off my RAM just to get out of the way and get a bit more space for working. Then I believe I just need to undo the retention bracket here. It's actually pretty loose as it is. It's kind of crazy. Oof, that literally just jumps off. Probably should loosen it. This motherboard is very naked right now. Or the socket in particular. So, what we're doing is we're reusing the screws. I'm just going to put this to the side. Now, the contact plate goes back on. Does look much better though. So that retention bracket goes together. Now, all 4 screws are in. Now, the idea here is to go backwards until it clicks to make sure that we don't ruin the threads. Okay, in place. So, just go, there you go. So now just go diagonally and just give it a 90-degree turn from wherever it is. So put 90 degrees. What we're doing this way is once we slowly turn each one of them across, we are lowering the plate down towards the CPU without applying too much pressure, and we're trying to keep it as even as possible. So when it gets to like quite hard to push, we'll stop. Okay, now that's nice and solid on there. As you can see, it looks really nice. It's a shame that that's going to be covered up by the CPU cooler, but that does look really nice. And you must save the actual cover from before, just in case you want to save the motherboard in the future, or if you need to send it off for repairs or warranty claim. Right, so the motherboard side is ready. Now we need to install a cooling bracket. So for the cooler, we're going to go with the Fractal Lumen 36, which is a 360mm cooler. It's an AAO, so it's got a lot of surface area, so hopefully that'll maintain our 12900K. This is a cooler, and it doesn't have any fancy RGB besides a little RGB light over here, mainly because this is a closed case. It doesn't even have a glass side panel, so I just wanted to get something which is efficient and somewhat reasonably budget friendly, even though this is not the cheapest cooler out there. Let's get that installed. With the bracket installed, and I, as you can see, done a little test fit, now we're ready to install this inside the case. So the bracket is nice and secure. All we need to do now is just put the AAO when we're ready. Right, let's put the RAM back on. 32 gig of 6400 mega transfer DDR5 RAM, so nice and fast. Maybe the wrong color for this build, but oh, white. It'll do. For the case itself, it's great to always remove just all side panels, front as well. I'm not sure I need to take off the front, but we'll do it anyway. Let's place it on its side. And I'll move the side bracket for the fans out for now. We'll use that a bit later on. Since this is a standard ATX motherboard, we don't need to rearrange any of the standoffs. So we just place it in and just start screwing it in. As you can see here, there is plenty of space for a motherboard of this size. And it should just click in. There you go. So there's the middle standoff, which is protruding. So you can just slide it on and it's just perfectly in line with everything that it needs to be. So all you need to do now is just screw in the motherboard and you're good to go. We can get on to the next task and probably get the power supply in place before we start messing around with the top where we're going to be installing the AAO. For the power supply, I've also decided to go with something a bit more long-term, where even if I change the graphics card or anything else within the system, I don't need to worry about. Power supply is one of those things that you should probably invest a bit more money and kind of think about a bit more long-term. And this is where a power supply from FSP comes in. This particular unit is a bit of a beast. For this system, it is an overkill. Even with a 4090, even if you overclock it, you're still gonna have some leftover power. But the most important part here is it's a 80 plus platinum rated, so it's gonna be very efficient. It's also already PCIe 5 ready, so I can connect the 4090 with a single cable, which is just amazing. No need for messing around with little dongles. And the other thing is FSP. A lot of people haven't heard of FSP. You know, it doesn't sound like a familiar company, but actually it's more familiar than you think. FSP is not just selling power supplies under their own name, they are also an OEM manufacturer. So companies like Cooler Master, EVGA, and some others actually use some of their power supplies and rebrand them with their own features, their own branding, and sell them. So it's not really a new player in the market. They definitely have a track record. So in this case, we're getting a pretty high-end Hydro PTM power supply from FSP. And this one's rated for 1200 watts. 1200 watts is a lot of power. And unless NVIDIA goes crazy with their 50 series graphics cards, I think this could be okay for many, many years. And talking about longevity, this particular power supply comes with a 10-year warranty. So I want it to last, and I wanted to look into the future and still be using this particular power supply. It's heavy. There's a lot of components inside. But it's actually not that crazy big in comparison to what I would expect it to be at that power. Inside the box, you also get a jumper wire or a jumper adapter, which is very convenient. So for example, if you're doing a water cooling build and you've just filled your loop and you're checking for leaks, you need one of these to jumpstart your power supply without powering up the rest of your components in case you have a leak, so you don't destroy your components. So for the power supply install, we need to take off the bracket from the case and just start screwing it all in. We might need to move one of the drive cages out of the way to fit this larger power supply, but it's not huge. So also, I don't use hard drives, so it really doesn't matter. Since it's a higher end power supply, it has an eco mode on, actually by default. So it will go into quiet mode when it's not used at a full power. I like that they have it by default set to eco mode, rather than having to click into it or you're forgetting about it. Let's have a look. Will this fit? So, as you can see here, even with the drive cage installed and the larger power supply, we're actually still able to set it in. And I've made sure that the actual fan for the power supply is pointing downwards. So you get plenty of intake and exhaust from below the actual case. So these cables, while they do look kind of cumbersome over the top, if you had a drive in here, SSD or a hard drive, it would just sit below, so it's actually fine. So the reason I try to do dealing with power supply cables first before installing the cooler is because you have a lot more accessibility here. So that means, for example, for this cable, I can install it now and not worry about it later, because there'll be a cooler above here. Now, same goes here. Let's get this one installed. And lastly, we need to install the other components. So in my case, I need to install the graphics card and also a network card. So we'll do that next. Since this graphics card is quite large, I need to do a little test fit. So it goes here. That means I need to take off a few covers. I remove that one and I skip one to install the network card. So this goes here. So I actually don't need to skip anything. Just install the network card right below. You should always start with a small device, which will be much harder to reach after. Once you've installed a huge graphics card, it's much harder to fiddle around and install the small device below it. So here we just install the network card. Before I do this, I'm actually going to go and deal with the cooler first, because we're going to need a bit more space, and I don't want to accidentally hit the graphics card and scratch it or damage it. Ultimately, that's the most expensive item inside this build. And we need to decide what we're going to do in terms of our fan orientation. With this case, I do like that you have markings for the fan sizes. So you have little labels of 0, 12, 14 and 18, which means you have 120, 140 and 180 mil fans that you can install. You can actually install two 180 fans up at top. But since we're going to be going with an AIO, we're going to install the 360 mil AIO, which is 3 120s, which can go up top here. So for the cooler, you really need to do a little test fit first and decide which way you want to put the tubes. So if we're trying to do it this way, you're going to have tubes kind of either bent very heavily or pushing into the fan over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flip it around and go this way, where the tubes are going to then head towards an empty area over here. And then we still have loads of space for the fans to install just below here. Or in this case, we're going to install the fans on this end so they can be in the pull configuration. So what we're going to do now is install the fans to the cooler, and then we're ready to mount. So we spared you from faffing out with the screws, and now we have 3 times more fans, and we're ready to start finishing this off. So first we're going to do is install the graphics card. That's just kind of the final little touch for the components that are within the system. So it just goes right in and just secure it in place with screws. Now the power supply cable for the graphics card goes right in, and we can pull it off from the other side. So that should do just fine. We'll kind of hang it to the side for a bit, so it's not creating too much pressure. Tension is okay actually here. So kind of move the tension away. Next we have 2 more fans to install on a side fan bracket. I've set them up in the push configuration to give fresh air for the graphics card, but we might test it out and see if we just set it up to a pull configuration to get rid of all the used air. We'll see how that goes. So I'm going to install it probably at the bottom section here, and with the graphics card and the cable in place, it actually still fits. So it kind of slots in here and like this. So I can feel the cable is got a bit of tension on it, but it's not too bad. And all we need to do now is just screw it in from the back. But as you can see, now the cable is just sticking out. So what you need to do with this particular case is you need to pre-plan it. So we just plug the cables in and maybe cable manage them a little bit. These cables, you can join them together. So you only need one connector. So what we're going to do is just join them together here and plug it in at the bottom of the motherboard. We have a few spare ports down here. I'm going to loop them in to make them a little bit more neat. I'm going to take this cable, I'm going to drop it down through one of the holes. What that will do is that will provide me ability to pull it out from the bottom later. So loop it out there, push it through the other hole and plug it in. As I said on the original review video, because this case has no spare space at the bottom, it's a bit fiddly to plug in the cables, but I've done it anyway. Now I can put this in, and as you can see, I can just pull the cables out from the bottom. So in, screws in at the back here, and we're done. All you need to do now is just cable manage it and set it to run. Since we're using a large 4090, the amount of space in between the card and the fans is not huge, but there's still some space, so you can still bend the cable around. But for example, if you're using an air cooler, as long as within the designated size, you can check out the actual specs in our main review video. You could also install this above here and provide more, whether it's fresh air or exhaust the hot air from within the system with these fans, depending which orientation you have them. But here we go. So we started with just the 3 fans at the front. Now we have 3 fans at the front and 3 140mm fans on the side and the back, and also 3 120mm fans at the top with the AO. Cable management wise, you have the 3 little Velcros over here which hold it okay. I've mentioned this in review as well, but I wish these were a bit bigger, and I wish they were kind of a hoop and loop fasteners so you can really tug on them. But generally speaking, you can kind of get most of your fan cables and RGB cables up top here and kind of hide in this little mess. And then for your big power supply cables, you hold them okay down below. And even though we don't have a drive in here right now, you can still fit them in, so there's still some space. So overall, the system is built, and I was able to fit in quite a considerable amount of devices. If, for example, you wanted to change the cooler, it's easy to do because the back panel is open. I can easily install some SSDs on the side here. It's actually really flexible. And again, you can install different fans up top. Overall, the build itself was pretty simple. Now I just want to turn it on and see if all the fans start spinning, and then I'm going to move it over to the office and actually run some tests to see how it performs in comparison to my old system. After wrapping up the build, I'd like to share some insight from my personal journey with it. This isn't about pitting one case against another in terms of performance. That's something we've tackled in the previous video. Instead, I want to delve into the changes and enhancements that came with overhauling my primary workstation. We conducted thermal tests and observed a slight increase in noise levels with the new system, just about 1 dBA louder at full throttle, which is hardly noticeable. However, the tone of the noise caught my attention. The Fractal Torrent, with its robust 180mm fans, hums with low-pitched noise like an idling car in the distance. In contrast, the Fractal North XL emits a sound akin to a conventional fan, but not horrible in any way. Temperature-wise, there wasn't much of a shift. The CPU maintained its cool, and the GPU saw a minor drop of about 1 degree Celsius. A closer look at performance metrics revealed something intriguing. The GPU's frequency stayed consistent, but the CPU's behavior marked a noticeable change. Initially, the performance was on par with the previous tests, but as we progressed beyond 30% of the test sequence, the new setup consistently outperformed the old by about 150 MHz. This enhancement in CPU performance underlines the subtle yet impactful benefits of the upgrade. Which leads me to a quick conclusion. The assembly process was straightforward, and even with the hefty components like the 4090 and the addition of the side fan bracket, there was still room to spare for more hardware. One significant improvement I've noticed with this setup is the fans reduced the need to ramp up throughout the day, leading to a quieter overall experience, which I find quite satisfying. In hindsight, one adjustment I might consider is repositioning the radiator to the front of the case. This would place the pump, which is integrated within the radiator, at the lower point in the build, potentially enhancing its longevity. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Have I overlooked anything else? Feel free to share your insights in the comments below. For those interested in exploring any of the gear featured in the video, you'll find the links in the description below as well. I hope you found this useful. Don't forget to give us a like and subscribe for more. We'll see you guys in the next one.